I love Berlin. I'm so happy to be here. I love Mark, so I'm so happy that he invited me. So thank you so much. Just a little bit of a warning. If you've seen me speak before, I usually do these sort of long, discursive, narrative-style stories. I'm not doing that today. Today pretty much is like a tips and tricks sort of playbook type talks. It's going to be a little bit different from what you might have seen before. So a few years ago, I spotted a trend. A lot of my friends had moved away from being individual contributors to maybe being a lead designer, or maybe even leading a team, a department, and in some instances, even whole companies. They'd finally got that seat at the table that they'd been desperately wanting for all this time. But rather than being happy, they were more stressed than ever before. They'd hoped that somehow becoming a leader would solve all of their problems they'd experienced as an individual contributor, when in fact it just created a ton more. Ton of new problems. Problems I've never had to deal with or even think about before. They'd fallen for this myth of leadership, that somehow all you need is power and authority to make change, and then somehow things just magically get better. However, it turns out that power and authority usually isn't enough. Power might give you more opportunities to influence the conversation, but power alone won't cut it. Instead, you need to develop a whole new set of skills, which I'll be talking about later in this presentation. So a pattern became clear. I was chatting to all these friends over tea and cake. I am British. I'm even standing on stage with a cup of tea as we speak. And I was chatting to my friends, and we were having pretty much the same conversation. It was like a Groundhog Day, deja vu, over and over again with different people, but the same conversations. My friends had found themselves in companies that really valued design. And in fact, they'd been hired to bring design into the sort of the fabric of the company and have a real impact. And that sounded great at the interview, but it was proving really problematic. They were getting inundated by resumes, but few people were applying, had the level they were looking for. Most were only sort of 18 months out of a general assembly course and already calling themselves a senior designer. When they did find somebody suitable, those people were in such high demand that a bidding war would start, and often they'd lose people. In the UK, when you lose your house in a bidding war, it's called gazumping. So these people were getting gazumped for talent. When they did find these amazing people, they only seemed to stick around for 18 months before being attracted to that next opportunity. As a result, my friends were spending more and more time recruiting. They'd basically become recruitment managers rather than design leaders. If they did somehow manage to build that team, they were finding it difficult to execute. Doubling their teams, it seemed, didn't double their output. In fact, every time their team doubled, it felt like their actual output halved. They were getting really, really slow. And particularly a lot of my friends that came from the agency world, they were finding that something they used to take them 6 months to deliver might take 16 now in-house. Another common problem that my friends were facing is the need to kind of constantly manage upwards. It was all very well having a seat at the table, but it often felt to them like a high chair. Marketing had budget, IT had power, and design were just sat in the corner playing with the crayons, keeping themselves entertained. Turns out that managerial focus in most organizations goes where the money is. And if you've got 100 people on your tech team, and you've got a marketing team spending millions of dollars on above-line advertising, if you've got a 10, 20-person design team or less, no one really seems to care what you say or think. And so you struggle to get a look in. Now, managing upwards had consumed so much of their time, they didn't really have enough time to look after their teams, to make sure that they were happy, to make sure that things were going well. And so the staff turnover was so high. In many cases also, they found themselves in kind of weird situations where they were kind of reporting to the head of IT or the head of product or marketing. They didn't really seem to fit. As such, very little of that kind of managerial infrastructure was in place, and they had to create all this stuff from scratch and look after their teams in new ways that they'd never had to deal with before. As a result, my friends were feeling stretched and wondering whether they'd made some terrible career move. Maybe design management wasn't for them. Maybe they felt like they should go back to becoming individual contributors, back to a design safe space. I'm sure we've all felt similar, whether it's design or technology. We've felt that feeling at some point in our career that suddenly somebody will come and unmask you, Scooby-Doo style, for the fraud that you really are. They'd fallen into the valley of despair, imposter syndrome. Now, design's leadership is still relatively new. We've had technologists and marketers and boards for ages. However, design representation at senior level is still a novelty, at least in the UK, where I'm from. Most organizations are lucky to have a director-level designer, let alone a VP or the mythical chief design officer. So I kind of just want to get a quick poll. I saw a lot of hands up earlier that said you're developers. How many people in the room would classify themselves as a design leader? So not necessarily a manager, but a design leader. I can see about 4 people. Okay, this talk is for you primarily. But don't worry, can I see a show of hands? Who's got a boss in the room? Only about 4 of you. Come on, who's got a boss in the room? Okay, that's a little bit better. So for people that have some kind of boss or manager, this is for you. Now, hopefully, I'm going to show you a bunch of good practices which your boss is doing day in, day out, because they're going to be amazing. But if you see maybe that they're not living up to standard, then hopefully this will give you a bit of a playbook, a set of tips to kind of hopefully steer them in the right direction, make them slightly better at their jobs. So, the reason I'm talking about this is because I've been an accidental design leader, or an accidental leader myself for the past 12 years. I say accidental because I never set out to lead a team or a company. Didn't really want to sort of be suddenly waking up one morning and managing 30 people. I had no real training, I just sort of fell into it. And this is probably how the majority of leaders, design, technology, whatever, find themselves. They just fall into it. You take someone that's good at doing one thing, like design, and say, okay, you must be good at doing something else you've never tried before. Give it a go. So I need to get way better. So about 3 years ago, I started a Slack community. It's now got about like 800 design leaders from all the big sort of tech companies. And I wanted to absorb and learn as much as I could from them. That's also why I started the Leading Design Conference. One of the benefits of running a conference is you get to speak to 20, 30, 40, 50 amazing design leaders. You get to see all these great talks, and then hoping that somehow, just almost by being in the same room with these people, some of this magic and wisdom would rub off. Not sure it has, but I'm keeping cracking on it, I guess. If you are interested in coming to the Design Leadership Conference, we're doing one in New York in June. And if you are running a team in-house, a design team, then drop me a line and I'd love to have you join the Slack channel. So as I said, I never set out to be a design leader. I mean, who dreams of growing up as a little 4 or 5-year-old? I want to be a manager, mummy. I was kind of part of Generation X. I was part of that generation that thought management were the enemy. The kind of like the Office Space kind of film movies that you think, you want to go and smash the sort of fax machine in or the photocopier. You don't want to kind of have responsibilities. So managers were the enemy until suddenly I became one. I accidentally became the enemy. So some days I feel I'm the living embodiment of the Peter Principle. The idea that you rise in a hierarchy of a company to the point of your own incompetence. And I do sometimes feel that, but also I think I've designed the company to be like that. I'll sort of explain. When I started Clearleft, I hated the classic model of leadership. The sort of superstar designer in the sort of black sort of polo neck, who kind of lorded over all the psychopathic juniors, to fluff their own egos. These design gods that are out there that just wanted to be the one unquestionable source of truth. And anyone that kind of asked them why they were doing this kind of, would get a firm and stiff rebuttal. It was all very Mad Men, and I hated this view of design. It was this traditional management approach, often kind of sort of shown by this pyramid, where those high up in the organization got there by standing on the shoulders of their team. And that allowed them to have a view over the horizons. They could scan the horizons for what was coming new. But they also exerted pressure on the people below, crushing their shoulders and sometimes crushing their dreams. That was a model that never attracted me. I was much more attracted to something that I later found out was called servant leadership. There's a crazy title book called Orbiting the Giant Hairball, which is all about kind of design leadership in sort of traditional advertising companies. And they talk about this sort of metaphor that design leadership should be, or design leaders should be the roots, the trunks, and the branches of a tree, providing support, nutrition, and stability. And your team are the fruits, which you push upwards to the sun, giving them nutrition, carrying their weight on your shoulders. And that was a much more attractive model of leadership, for me anyway. The other idea is kind of hiring people who are better than you and then providing a space so they can get on and do their work. I don't see the logic behind hiring great people and then telling them what you think they should do rather than listening to what they think they should do or be doing. This model is kind of, the idea of providing ground cover, or providing air cover, ground support, and clearing the barriers away. It just seemed like a much more grown-up model to me. Also, I read this book 12 years ago called The E-Myth Revisited. It's a really old sort of naff entrepreneurship book. But the one piece of advice I took from it was, as a leader, as an entrepreneur, you need to constantly be offloading the tasks that other people can do to give you the time and energy to focus on the tasks that only you can do. It's basically a fancy way of saying bad leaders dictate, good leaders delegate. Now, this is obvious folk wisdom, but it's still very true. I'm also fond of saying that processes don't make good products, people do. You can have a team full of amazing people and it doesn't work. It doesn't matter like if they're following an agile process or a lean process or a waterfall process or something else. If they've got a vision and they're working together, great work is bound to emerge. Similarly, no amount of process is going to take a failing team and make them any better. They'll probably just fail slightly more efficiently. So our focus was to kind of hire people with a calling, not just people with a great looking resume or portfolio that kind of just talk the talk, but people who really cared about their craft, who were continually wanting to improve. And it's worth noting there are very few people out there with a genuine calling, so it's not a great scaling mechanism. Clearleft are a 30-person company. We could be a 300-person company if we didn't have that kind of sort of barrier. But we wanted to surround ourselves with people who had that passion that we did. So scaling on passion alone is really, really difficult. That being said, our industry is an industry based around talent. And so to be a great design leader, or a great leader in any sense, you need to basically become a talent scout. Now, it sounds glib, but the easiest way to hire people to build a great team is to build a team that people want to be on. If you're in-house, you want to be the ones that look like you're having the most fun, look like you're learning the most, look like you're shipping the best products. If you're an external agency like us, again, you want to surround yourselves by great, inspirational people. Be the team that people want to come and leave their job for, even if maybe they're taking a downgrade or a pay cut. They want to be where the sort of source of the action is. They want to grow as individuals. So when Clearleft started back in 2005, we were arguably one of the first UX agencies in the UK, at least. And so people really, really wanted to sort of come and join us. But even then, it takes hard work. It means getting out there, it means speaking at events, it means growing your influence, it means having opinions, it means going and constantly going to events and talking to people and having coffees and sort of feeding that sort of talent pipeline. Also, it can't just be about you. You need to go out there and show the amazing work your team does. If people are attracted to great teams, you need to put your team front and center. It's also important to realize that salaries often are just table stakes, particularly if you're a creative person. The best designers I know, anyway, aren't usually motivated by money. They're motivated by interesting design challenges and the opportunity for growth. The good thing is it's produced a network effect. If you hire these people, they grow, they attract more people, and you just get this beautiful organic growth. They come to you because of the opportunities you present, not just the paycheck. You also obviously need to signal to the community that you really care about design and invest in people. Things like generous conference budgets, support for people who wish to start speaking, organizing internal brown bags for visiting kind of like designers or tech people, visiting lectures, in-house workshops. There's loads of ways to kind of signal that you're actually investing in people. The number of companies I know that sort of see going to conferences not as some kind of career development, but as some kind of reward for being a good sort of person. Like, oh, there's 10 of you in the design team, and one of you get to go to a conference this year. Aren't you lucky? That's a horrible way of doing it. Ever since we started at Clearleft, we had a budget that we set, and it's like everyone has access to this budget. Everyone's got I think it's like 1,500 euros now or something, and you can go to any conference or event you want. You can go in any training you want, kind of no questions. It's yours to spend because we're investing in you. So also your environment means a lot. You need to create a great environment to do great work. I'm not talking about beer pong tables and office slides here. The place doesn't have to look like a frat house. You just need basic things like plenty of wall space, plenty of meeting rooms, space to focus, space to think. Often when we've worked with some of our clients, we've had to fight their kind of HR and facilities team because we worked with this one design client that really, really cared about the way their office looked. So all the desks had to be cleaned at the end of the night. All the stuff had to be stripped off the walls. In fact, they even hated you putting sticky notes on the wall in case some important person came and saw that the place was messy. This was crazy. This was preventing the design team from doing design. Often I joke that when good designers get together, their workspace looks like some kind of crime has happened because it's just plasters of sticky notes and diagrams. And if you came to my design thinking workshop yesterday, you'll probably sort of get to experience some of that. So actually some of the jobs of design leaders are really, really sort of boring. It's just fighting HR, fighting facilities to allow you to take that awful picture of a prancing pony off the wall and stick up something important like a user journey map. Sometimes it's a case of having the right equipment. A friend of mine started a job recently, and it was 6 weeks until they got their laptop. For 6 weeks, they'll come into the office and just sit around twiddling their thumbs, not knowing what to do or how to be valuable, because it took that long just to get the basic equipment to do their job. So these kind of things need to be sort of cut down. Now, Steve Jobs apparently used to say that it's better to have a hole than an arsehole, which I find slightly ironic from what we know about Steve Jobs' management style. But I guess, like all organisms, one arsehole is enough. Thank you. Oh, very sweet. But basically, you get this sort of like idea of like these genius designers. We want to get this genius in because they're just genius and everything's going to change. But you need to make sure that you have right people that are going to work well with others. And I would prefer to have like somebody that is a great team player than somebody's going to come in and kind of piss everyone off and make them leave. You have to realize that no matter how talented somebody is, they can have a toxic effect of everything you're doing. So be really careful when you're hiring. We hire really slowly at Clearleft because we want to avoid those sort of, the trauma of getting the wrong person on the team. You also, when you're sort of forming teams, this is true for designers and technologists, you need to have a balance of people with different sort of attitudes and interests. A lot of early-stage startups fill themselves with pioneers, people at the cutting edge of technology. But when the company starts to grow, those pioneers feel out of place because it's now not about kind of charting new sort of frontiers. It's about taking what you've got and turning it into something valuable, to settle and to kind of extract value from that product. And so it might be, time that the pioneers move on and you start building settlers. Or maybe as the company gets bigger, you need to get some town planners in to make sure that the infrastructure are in place. And actually, a lot of design leaders and managers are those kind of infrastructure people. So you need to have a good balance and don't just think you're going to fill a company full of amazing genius, rock star, unicorn designers because they're going to get bored and leave really quickly when they realize it's optimizing your ad flow process. Okay, so you've got this amazing team. You spent 3 months, tons of hiring, you've got the right people in. How do you keep them for longer than 18 months? Well, one of the biggest reasons I see for people leaving jobs early is they were sold this amazing culture, and when they get in, that culture collaboration doesn't exist. It's not what they've been promised. So one of your jobs as a leader is to make sure that you don't just sort of create a set of fancy values that you pay lip service to excite people to join, but those values actually become part of your business, part of your culture, and you live those values. So purpose is important to people. So create a clear mission, a clear set of values that people can align with and get behind, and make sure that your decisions as a leader meet those values. And also be aware that if they don't meet those values, you want someone to call you out on that and say, actually, look, Andy, these are our set of values, and this thing here, you're not behaving in this way, you need to kind of change. And that's tough sometimes for people to hear. But people who believe in the meaning and the goal of what they're doing are much more likely to stay than people that just see themselves as a resource to be sort of utilized and depleted. Another great way of kind of retaining people is to foster a sense of community and collaboration. You want to surround yourself by people that you actually like spending time with, people that you care for. You're probably going to spend 7, 8, 9 hours of the day. You're probably going to spend more time with them than you do with your family or children, which is a problem in its own right in our kind of current working culture. So this means creating sort of a tight sort of social network. And one way of doing this is obviously to merge your work and your life. I see a lot of that in kind of sort of Silicon Valley. Arranging movie nights, barbecues, after-work drinks. It's all really great, and we've done this before, particularly when you've got a young team. However, you need to be conscious that people have outside lives, outside commitments, families, home lives. And people feel pressured. If your boss says, come tonight, we're doing tequila shots, you might not be comfortable feeling like you can say no, and particularly in this sort of Me Too environment, it's possibly not appropriate. So try not to pressure folks into doing too much of out-of-office stuff. And try and do as much of it in work as possible. And maybe try and do it without alcohol. I know that's kind of, tough for maybe, Berlin audience here. But sometimes it's more fun to kind of go and have a juice evening or have lunches with the team than kind of going and kind of boozing it up. And I'm not saying don't booze it up because I like beer as much as the next person. But you need to understand that there are people in your team that doesn't work for them. And you don't want to be excluding. You don't want to be exclusive. There's a lot of research that shows that people don't leave companies, they don't even leave teams, they leave managers. And if you're a boss and you find yourself in a situation where lots of your staff are leaving, it's easy to sort of try and protect your ego and go, well, there are other reasons. Clearly isn't me, this person wasn't a great fit, they probably weren't good at their job anyway, they clashed with other people. But we build these lies to protect ourselves, protect our own ego. If you're seeing a lot of people leaving your company, you probably want to say, how am I contributing to this? What do I need to do to change myself, my environment, my culture to prevent this from happening? Because you tend to find that the best people move on because they've got lots of great opportunities. And the people that don't have those opportunities stay, and that's not a good place to be. So a great way of doing this is just to sort of organize sort of feedback sessions, regular feedback sessions, for you as a boss. This can be painful, but it can be an important learning experience. Another reason people leave is just burnout. Constantly sprinting to hit that next deadline is exhausting. Having no flex in your resource planning is exhausting. Constantly saying yes to every project is exhausting. I think one of the reasons people leave after 18 months, particularly in internal teams, because they look ahead at the next 18 months. It looks no different from the past 18 months. And they're burnt out and they're tired and they want to do something else. So as designers, one of the other problems we have is we just want to be helpful. So we say yes to everything. And so I think it's really important for us to learn to say no. I find developers have got this down pat. So if you're a designer and you want to learn how to say no, hang out with developers for a while and you'll learn that important skill. You also need to be better at kind of scheduling your time and build in time for innovation. Whether it's 20% time, whether it's hack days, whether it's taking weeks off to kind of go and play with technology, you need to protect this stuff because that's often the thing that your team will live for. If you're working on a massive project, try not to put them on another massive project. Try and give them a little design sprint or just give them some time to kind of deal with their kind of design backlog or kind of, the admin mess. Another thing to kind of break out of the tyranny of the sprint is to sort of recommend breaking your sort of thinking, your product backlog into shearing layers. The bulk of your team effort really should be on the current or the next sprint or release. However, you should be putting about 20 or 30% of your effort into what's coming next. That product that will be coming in 6 months' time that you need to start gearing up for and thinking about. And lastly, maybe 10% of your effort should be going on the future. So running experiments that maybe in 3 to 5 years will become the next big thing that your company delivers. Now, in my experience, good designers are happy to spend all their day perfecting their designs. They love craft, they're happier when they're designing. Really great designers want to ship. They want to create designs that get into the hands of customers as quickly as possible. They want to see their work being used, and they're pragmatic. Great designers get super frustrated if it takes too long to ship, or worse, products get sidelined or canned because they've taken too long. So one of your biggest jobs as a design leader is to ensure that the great design teams you have are able to execute and get stuff out the door. So one of the biggest challenges I see in internal teams is executing at pace. The best designers spend a lot of time removing organizational barriers, helping teams move fast, helping deliver to a higher standard. And design systems are a great tool for this. Part of the broader field of design operations. Design operations is becoming increasingly important. How can we get designs out of Sketch in the hands of customers faster? How can we remove these barriers and make us more efficient? Removing unwanted efficiencies and waste from the system. I would argue that sort of any in-house design team that is around sort of 20 to 30 people or more should seriously consider getting some kind of design ops function in-house. That could be a role, it could be an individual, it could be a whole team. Looking at how design works in your company and removing those redundancies and optimizing for delivery. Now, one of the things you can do is model good behavior and visibly take care of small things around the studio. Sometimes it's as simple as cleaning up the studio as a design leader when folks are busy, offering to make a round of tea, particularly if you're British. Just because you're the head director or VP of design doesn't mean you're too good to not, get your hands dirty once in a while, to take the bins out if things are overflowing, to give your team the space. And I think if you model that behavior, people will then start to look after their environment as well. If you don't, people will go, well, I'm too important to bother opening the door, or answering the phone, let someone else deal with it. So these small things, broken windows type sort of mentality sort of have a trickle-down effect. I'm sure you're probably aware by now of Google's Aristotle project. It's been talked about sort of ad infinitum, a lot of design and sort of tech conferences. But basically, Google did this large-scale project to see if there are any similarities in the high-performing teams and the low-performing teams in Google. And they created this list of kind of attitudes of what what works for kind of tech companies. And impact, meaning some of the things we talked about, clarity, dependability, were really, really important. But the key finding was that psychological safety was the biggest indicator of performance in a team. I sometimes wonder whether the sort of whole San Francisco fail fast, fail often mantra came out of kind of like the lenience of hiring and firing policies. And if you have lenient hiring and firing policies, you're permanently afraid that what you do might get you fired. That is not a place of safety. And also, you're permanently scared that if you say something stupid, that people are going to think that you're an idiot and you're going to get fired, and that's not a place of safety. So one of the biggest challenges, I think, of a design leader or anybody in a team is to make sure that the rest of your team feels psychologically safe to express themselves, to express their individuality, to express their rules. That doesn't mean that you have to do what they ask you to do, but it means that you have to listen and kind of, accept that people, want to be felt heard. So in order to support that team, you need to make sure they have all the necessary resources, support structures, as we saw in the last slide, in place. They need to know that they're valued, they need to know that their value is understood around the organization, and that they are important members of the team and the company. After all, designers are often having to fight for resources and justify their own existence, and if they're doing that, very little work gets done. So a big part of your job is managing upwards. Showing the value of design around the organization to make other departments, other teams really understand what you contribute. And this can be done in dozens of ways. Organizing kind of lunch and learns, setting up a company-wide sort of design team mailing list, arranging crit sessions, with teams that don't have designers. These are all great ways of showcasing the value of design around your organization, making sure that senior designers buy in. And even things like being a great graphic facilitator or knowing how to facilitate workshops, or some of the stuff I was teaching yesterday around design thinking, are great ways of exposing all the great value designers have to the rest of the organization. So they don't just think that you're the delivery people. Now, one of the challenges I think designers have is we have such a strong belief in the power of design. We often get frustrated if people don't see it immediately. As a result, it's easy for designers to get drawn into battles they can't win and sort of leave feeling sort of beaten up and deflated, believing that the organization doesn't just get design or doesn't get design. Unfortunately, the old saying goes that if you want to trap flies, you catch them more with honey than vinegar. Technically and scientifically, that's not true. Actually, if you want to catch flies, use vinegar, not honey. Just a little tip there. But the old person's tale still stands. So to be a really good, capable designer, you need to build a collaborative environment. You need to forge alliances. You need to demonstrate how smart design can help other people reach their goals. Because if you can help other people reach their goals, they will trust you. They will invite you into those conversations. They will invite you into those meetings. And that allows you to spread the power of design around the organization, particularly if you're helping people meet their individual and personal goals. And actually a little thing that we do at the start of every project is we ask everybody around the table to kind of express what their learning goals are for this project, both internally and externally. And if we can find opportunities to help that person reach that goal, to learn that new technique or technology, then everyone's a winner. One of the best ways of operationalizing design, apart from building a design ops team, is to weave design in the governance fabric of your organization. So design is not being involved just in delivering projects, but commissioning them, setting up the context for success. And one of our clients, he did this really small little hack, which I just thought was brilliant. This very, very large company in the UK had this horrible little Word document that the execs would use to kind of fill in to say, well, this is what I wanted. And they would fill in, what I want, how much I want to spend, and when I want to get it, without any understanding of whether these three things were compatible. And he was asked to redesign the form, presumably just because it looked ugly. And we've got someone to colour in the form. This was like a head of design, a VP of design. But rather than just making it look pretty, he reconfigured how new projects were conceived within the organization. Like for every kind of business metric, every KPI, he'd make a customer metric to make sure that if the client said, well, we want you to double page impressions, well, that's great, but we're not going to do it if that means that our net promoter score goes down. So just having these kind of complementary pairs suddenly made the rest of the organization think about design and commissioning projects in a different way. So apologies for the language, but I'm British, so hopefully it sounds charming. But essentially there are two sorts of managers. Those that protect their team from the shit that comes down from above, and those that pass the shit directly around the rest of the team and the company. And the best leaders are the ones that protect their team and shield from all the crap that they have to deal with on a daily basis. You want a leader that goes to bat for you, rather than someone that will just kind of pass the buck and go, well, it wasn't me, it was those people over there. And this is actually one of the reasons why I think design leadership can be quite isolating, because a lot of the time your team might not know all of the fights you've been having privately, because you're trying to not expose them to all of this stress because you want to give them a safe space to just deliver. So if you have a design leader or manager in your life, every now and again, I know it's nice to have your boss give you some love, but sometimes it's nice to give someone that back, just to say, look, Andy, I know you've been having a tough time with X, Y, Z at the moment. I just want to say thank you for all the stuff you've been doing for us on the team. And as well as probably, helping your promotional prospects, that person will just really, really appreciate that sometimes, that kind of little sort of emotional hug thing is really important. And actually, the conference that I run, Leading Design, is amazing because basically you get sort of 200-300 design leaders in a room who are almost breaking down because it's so stressful. It's a really, really challenging space to be a design leader. And so you need support. If you're a design leader, if you're a new design leader, you're probably making this stuff up as you go along. And so having somebody that you can look to, there's a mentor, there's a coach that's done this before, that can help you along your way is really, really important. And frankly, a lot of other execs, a lot of MBAs, a lot of CMOs, CTOs will have coaching. So if you see that other executives around your organization have that kind of coaching and support, ask for it yourself. And if they don't, it might even be worth kind of going to a coach directly or just a friend who's maybe a few years ahead of you in your career to kind of get some thought and advice from them. A lot of people spend all their time managing upwards. They're focused on the career ladder. They want to succeed. They want to give their senses, give a sense to the bosses that everything is going great, so they'll be including the next promotion. Unfortunately, if you're that kind of boss and you're managing upwards always, often you spend your life forgetting what's going on in the studio, forgetting the rest of your team, and end up having happy executives but a disgruntled, demoralized team, and that's not a good place to be. So don't spend your whole time managing upwards. This can be really difficult in a flat organization when there's only one senior leader. It's really tough to be a leader if you've got any more than sort of 4 to 6 direct reports. So if you're in a larger company, this is why having a VP of design supported by a series of directors can be really useful. Because the VP's design focus is upwards and then the directors are sort of focused downwards and outwards. So you need this support. Design leadership is a sort of a team sport. It's also really hard to manage people that care. Because you have impassioned conversations. Actually, if people don't care, you just tell them what to do and they go away and do it. And it's sort of lifeless, but it's easy. If you work with amazingly talented people, designers, developers, marketing people, you can get into some sort of really sort of knotty conversations. But it's really, really important to remember that what people are arguing out isn't about you and your personality or the individual personality. It's about the problem and the project. And it's all focused on moving something forward. So sometimes it's quite hard to remove your emotions from that equation, but it's really, really important to do to stay sane. But ultimately, good designers, they look after their team. They take interest in their team. They understand what's going on in their lives. They understand what's going on in their families and their kids and their sporting activities and all this kind of stuff. So make sure that you have regular one-on-ones. Make sure you connect with your team members. And this is basic stuff, but the number of people I meet that are design leaders, and when I ask them when they had the last one-to-one, it was like, well, I did an annual review, or maybe I do these things quarterly. And that's not a close enough cycle to check in with people to make sure they're happy and comfortable and psychologically safe. And in these sessions, you need to spend less time about talking about the minutiae of day-to-day work, less time talking at them, to be honest, and more time listening. So I see these sessions, these one-on-ones, as a form of design research. I'm going in there with my sleuthing hat on to try and understand what's going on so I can make it better. The other thing is, I think it's really easy if you're a design leader or a leader of any kind. You spend all your life in emails or, jumping from meeting to meeting. And you can go weeks without really kind of connecting with the people you're looking after. So you need to make sure that you spend time just walking the floor, whether that's kind of just walking over to people for a chat, hanging out at the coffee area, but just generally making yourself available for chit-chats. Because often, the really, really useful and interesting stuff doesn't come at the one-to-ones, which feel quite formal, but it's that chat over coffee where someone says, I've got this great idea, or I'm having a problem here, can you help me? I know it's really easy to be busy and get divorced from the day-to-day, the ebb and flow of the studio, but you need to be present to be a great leader. And being present also means being able to give quick and actionable and timely and helpful feedback. But make sure that feedback is said with kindness. There's a book which is very popular at the moment, Kim Scott's book, Radical Candor. I have lots of problems with this as a Brit because there's a lot of talk about rock stars and ninjas, and it's so kind of cheesy. It actually appeared in an episode of Silicon Valley, taking the piss out of the idea of radical candor. But really, really quickly, the idea is when you give feedback, if you give feedback that's challenging, that's really helpful. But if you do it in a kind of aggressive way, it actually saps people's attention. Also, you can do the opposite, which is what a lot of Brits do, which is kind of ruinous empathy. I've been into tons of meetings where I thought, wow, that was really tough, but we had a really tough conversation. And the other person at the end of the conversation said, I just had a lovely chat with Andy. Because, we're not very good at, emoting and kind of like being honest, us Brits. And so trying to move to this area of caring passionately, but challenging people. But challenging them not just to be a dick, but challenging them because you want to help them progress in their career. And by them progressing, you progress as well. The other thing to bear in mind is there's not just one sort of mode of leadership. There's lots of kind of leadership models out there, but different people at different times of their career need different things. Maybe if you're somebody that kind of has a high level of competence and is very, very sort of like, sort of has a lot of individual sort of, motivation, you might want to direct them. Whereas if it's somebody that's quite new and has a sort of a low level of kind of motivation, you need to support them. So there's different kinds of approaches you need to sort of satisfy different people in your team. And if you try and approach everything by supporting and coaching and delegating, you're going to piss people off. One thing I think we do really poorly in this industry is praising people for a job well done. And it's really important to kind of praise people publicly. I think actually praising people publicly and critiquing people privately is the best way to go. If you critique people in front of an all-hands meeting, we had a client once that basically their all-hands meeting was almost like some kind of frat beasting process, where slowly team after team would get up on stage and be humiliated in front of the rest of the company for not hitting their deadlines. And the people running this team thought this was good for them. Some kind of like military hazing that like all we have to do is keep punching them in the face and eventually they'll love us for it. Some kind of weird abusive kind of relationship. But not at all, So praise publicly and often critique privately, but with care. And like I say, the other thing is like making sure that you're looking after individual growth. Again, whether you're a designer or technologist, this really counts. We want to get better, we want to learn, we want to grow. And if we're in a company that stops allowing us to do that, we move on. So make sure that you have some kind of maybe leveling system in place. We started doing a leveling system like 4 or 5 years ago. A lot of companies now are doing this as well. But basically it says like, well, this is what we think a leader looks like. This is what we think, this is just a little, small selection. We're probably going to be publishing our leveling system in a few weeks' time. But this is what a leader looks like, this is what a principal looks like, this is what a director looks like, this is what a VP looks like. These are the behaviors we want to expect. Because then when somebody comes to you for that one-on-one on that quarterly meeting and say, look, Andy, I'm a lead at the moment, but I really want to move to a principal. Rather than it just going, oh, well, you've been here 2 years, so I'm going to give you that advance. It's going to be, well, okay, that's great. You're really, really strong in these areas. You're less strong in these areas. Let's put a little plan together over the next 3 months. And if we can get you to do this, this, and this, then absolutely no problem, we'll level you up to that next level. And knowing what the responsibilities are is really important. Another thing that's really important is giving your team autonomy. I talked earlier about kind of like hiring great people and getting out of their way. That can have a backlash though, because autonomy without accountability is basic like the kind of kids running the sort of playgroup. It's chaos. And so accountability kind of holds those people to account. And so I used to use this accountability ladder, which I don't do now because that, frankly, is a bit negative and patronizing. But this is an idea that, like, sometimes people, are unaware of what's going on. If something breaks, they blame somebody else, or maybe they just make excuses, or if they're a little bit more mature, they kind of just wait and hope, or acknowledge the reality. And people who are really good actually own the problems, or they go about finding solutions, or they just get on with it. And if you have a highly accountable team, they're just getting on with it. They're finding solutions. If you have a team with low accountability, they're blaming other people, they're not taking any responsibility, that's not a good place to be. But recently I found this kind of switch on the ladder, which I think is a lot more positive. It's actually written by a guy called David Marquette, who wrote a really good management book called Turn the Ship Around. He was an or at the time, he was a captain of a nuclear submarine. And at the last minute, he switched from a submarine he'd spent 3 years learning how to command into one that he knew how none of it worked. And so he'd go up and ask the sailors, like, what does that do? And the sailors thought he was kind of like testing them. So he was like, well, I don't know. What do you know? And then he'd go, well, what do you think it does? And he's like, well, I don't know. Like, should we press it? Yeah, let's press it. This is a nuclear submarine. But people thought that they were testing him, but really he hadn't a clue. And so his sort of incompetence actually allowed the whole team to make their own decisions rather than just deferring everything to the captain. And we've seen this. There's a whole thing called high power index. We've seen lots of airline crashes where the co-pilot, particularly in kind of like countries in Southeast Asia where there's a high power index, where the co-pilot can see that the plane is heading towards a mountain, but doesn't really want to bother the captain because, well, he's the captain. We better not flag that up because I don't want to insult him. And so, like, flipping it around is like, when you're talking to your team, tell me what you're doing, or when you're talking to your leader, the first thing you might say is like, tell me what to do, and that's a very low-level accountability. And then you might start saying what I think, or I recommend, or I'd like to do this. And as your accountability levels go up, you say, well, I intend to do this, I've done this, or I'm currently doing this. And again, that's the ideal state we want all of our teams to be in, where people are just getting on and doing stuff, but informing you what they're doing at the time, so you can kind of feed in and be useful. So those are really sort of my 5 key concerns I see repeating themselves amongst my friends over and over again. The challenges of finding talent, the challenges of retaining talent, the challenges of executing at pace, the challenges of managing upwards, the challenges of managing down. And I've tried to share some of my own personal experiences. There really is no one-size-fits-all kind of process to leadership, particularly creative leadership. Instead, it's a mixture of like folk wisdom and tactics. And a lot of this stuff, as you see, is bleeding obvious, to be honest. But it's amazing how little of it is still being done. However, very few design leaders, very few leaders seem to be doing this effectively. And so I think it's worth taking these sound bites and repeating them time and time again. Because ultimately, good design leadership is easy to understand, but it's bloody hard to execute well. Thank you very much. Thank you.